When was the first time you viewed a digital collection or exhibit? Was it a part of the first generation when Adobe Flash Player was cutting-edge technology, or was it a more modern digital collection with rich metadata for increased searchability, or the newest iteration of a digital exhibit with a focus on interaction for better engagement? Digital collections and exhibits are now part of many archival organizations' priorities as they respond to the demands of users, especially over the past year with many buildings closed and users stuck at home. One of the principles included in the Code of Ethics for the Society of American Archivists is access and use, and according to it, archivists actively promote open and equitable access to records in their care as much as possible. They strive to minimize restrictions and maximize ease of access. They facilitate the continuing accessibility of archival materials in all formats. Digital collections and exhibits are designed specifically for this principle, increasing access and use by reaching users who may not have been reached otherwise and making access easier for everyone with an internet connection. But what constitutes a digital collection or exhibit? It's really about using digital technology, including images, videos, or internet communications, to display a repository's holdings. As part of the mission of the Digital Public Library of America, or DPLA, says, DPLA envisions a future in which digital technology serves to spread knowledge and unleash creativity so that all of our stories are told. Outreach in all forms is vital to the continued use and existence of archives. Elsie Freeman Finch, a proponent of public relations work in archives, talks about the need for outreach in her book, Advocating Archives. Using archives is not an easy task for actual or potential clients, Freeman Finch says. Use must be intentionally and actively encouraged. That encouragement, based largely on our relations with our publics, is not an add-on to so-called core functions. While Freeman Finch focuses on public relations here, I would argue that digital collections and exhibits are an extension of that, meeting the public where they are online through search engines, social media, and even press coverage for digital projects, and developing a relationship. In her book, Archives, Principles, and Practice, Laura Miller reiterates Freeman Finch, stating, "The archivist is not a publicist, but the archivist can be an advocate, promoting the value of archives and the wealth of the repository's holdings in order to raise awareness and support for the institution's work." Now that we have a base for what digital collections are and what outreach is, let's look at the ways that digital works as outreach. These programs lower the barrier to entry by making archives less intimidating, as Freeman Finch discussed. They can bring new users into the world of primary sources by introducing the sources through a familiar concept, searching the internet. As Kate Thimer states about the concept of Archives 2.0, which involves web-based archival practices, it argues that archivists must be user-centered and embrace opportunities to use technology to share collections, interact with users, and improve internal efficiency. Based on the literature about digital collections and exhibits, I have identified three main categories of digital functioning as outreach: their accessibility, their interactivity, and the representation they can bring to groups overlooked in traditional archives. There is an increased general accessibility with digital collections and exhibits because all one needs is an internet connection to view it. Access from anywhere also means that research of a collection in Central Florida, for example, can happen worldwide, like with the Everglades Digital Library, or EDL. In an article about the EDL, the author Clement said, "Digital collections serve as outreach vehicles when they push high-value library resources out to an audience who otherwise could not access them." One of the results of this access to the EDL was that it bettered the repository. Because of it and its accompanying virtual reference service, new documents were added to the collection and new relationships with subject experts were formed. For physical temporary exhibits, having an accompanying digital exhibit means preserving that exhibit in the long term, providing a broader reach. UC Santa Cruz did this with a virtual tour of the Love on Hate exhibit in their Grateful Dead archive, using a special camera to capture 360-degree images. Searchability of digital collections and exhibits also increases access. This is facilitated by rich metadata assigned to the collections by the creators. In fact, metadata is vital to digital, as Seb Harwell states in an article about developing a virtual exhibit on disability history. The role of metadata extends well beyond the mechanics of description, searching, and retrieval. It is integral to the intellectual aspects of research. Of course, accessibility also includes providing access for those with disabilities. And while digital can provide that for those who can't easily leave home, that also means adhering to web accessibility standards. Being interactive can be an important component of digital collections and exhibits as well. Some exhibits, like the Grateful Dead Archive Virtual Tour, imitate the feeling of exploring a physical exhibit. When writing about the exhibit, the creators described it as an immersive digital tour of one of the library's most visited physical spaces, with the shared goal of exploring ways to increase access to and engagement with the library's unique collections. Thanks to metadata, the interaction of searching a collection or clicking through an exhibit can add new context to it, within a controlled environment, of course. In fact, the metadata is important to that control to make sure collections and exhibits are grouped so that the user can access them without confusion. As Gauld states, although online researchers have greater flexibility in terms of the strategies that can be used to identify materials, controlled vocabulary and structured points of access remain perhaps the most effective means of aggregating and ultimately locating relevant information. Increased representation of diverse communities is happening across digital and physical repositories, but it's becoming a hallmark of digital because of its broader user base. Part of the Society of American Archivists Code of Ethics says, building collections that reflect the diversity of humanity is key to preserving a historical record that encompasses the stories of all peoples instead of just those who wield the power and influence to ensure their lives are documented. The process of archiving is becoming more transparent, which can lead to changes in what collections look like. When discussing the idea of Archives 2.0, Thymer states, today's archivists increasingly realize that their own decisions regarding appraisal, processing, and description should be documented and available to researchers. Digitization can be seen as democratization because of the lower barrier to access, and it can impact whose story is told and who gets to hear that story. When discussing the idea of using stories to measure the impact of digital, Diana Marsh and co-authors described an effect of a collection centered on Native Americans, saying, the stories told about the institution's engagement with source communities prompted staff members to also rethink the audience of their collections. Of course, to have these effects with a digital collection or exhibit, there are best practices for creating and implementing it. These fall into 5 categories. Funding can be important, especially to cover costs of digitization, and grants exist to help defray these costs, as Clement's team found when they wanted to build up the Everglades Digital Library. Collaboration is also a great resource, whether for funding purposes or to manage the workload. This can be between institutions, such as the Florida Gulf Coast University Library, which works with historical societies and community organizations to digitize collections and bring them online, or between departments in the same institution, such as the University Historic Photograph Collection at Colorado State University, who built a digital collection through collaboration between archivists, a digital projects librarian, and a metadata librarian. Users can also be a good resource, whether through crowdsourcing new content or metadata about existing content. The Smithsonian Institution created a transcription center in 2013 where volunteers can transcribe digitized materials in order to increase the speed with which they are made available to the public. This kind of user engagement can also be encouraged through social media. In fact, Thymer discusses this, saying archivists should be facilitators, not gatekeepers. She says, using social media tools, archivists can even invite user contributions and participation in describing, commenting, and reusing collections, creating so-called collaborative archives. The College of Charleston Special Collections Research and Outreach Specialist has given interviews about how her use of Reddit to publicize collections has led to users sharing stories and memories about the buildings or events that she posts. Finally, measuring and revising is an important step in creating and maintaining digital collections and exhibits. They require a shift in mindset, away from perfect products and towards iterative products, as Thymer indicates in Archives 2.0, saying, more and more archivists have come to expect that the work they do will be revisited, revised, and corrected. In a case study by Marissa Mason that uses various social media platforms as outreach for archives at the University of Albany, the author says social media or Web 2.0 outreach efforts, which we might refer to as Outreach 2.0, require much more than just adapting new technologies, such as creating a Facebook page or a Twitter account. It should mean transitioning into an entirely new way of engaging with users. While reviewing the literature on digital collections and exhibits, the main takeaway is that they create more visibility for cultural heritage organizations. When an organization has an online presence, especially through a digital collection or exhibit, that can appear in search results, be used in research from home, simulate a visit when facilities are closed, or bring focus to a community that's traditionally been underrepresented, it increases the pool of users and the impact of the organization.